The cold came down from the mountains like something alive and hungry. Sheriff Ethan Cole felt it bite through his buffalo coat as he rode the frozen plains north of Bitter Ridge, his breath turning to white mist that hung in the still air before dissolving into nothing. The Morgan mare beneath him, a good horse named Sable, picked her way carefully through snow that had fallen 3 days prior and now lay crusted over with ice. It was December 15th, 1878. The sun hung low and pale in the western sky, offering light but no warmth. Ethan had no particular business riding out this far. His jurisdiction ended at the creek 2 miles back. But sleep had become impossible in recent months, and the cabin he returned to each night felt more like a tomb than a home. So he rode. The loneliness was easier to bear when he kept moving. He was 35 years old and felt 60. The war had aged him. The loss that came after had hollowed him out. For 3 years now, he had worn the badge and done his duty and felt nothing except the mechanical rhythm of days passing. He protected a town that barely needed protecting. He enforced laws in a place where most folks were too tired to break them. And he went home to empty rooms that still smelled faintly of the woman who had died there. The mare suddenly stopped. Her ears came forward, nostrils flaring. Ethan's hand moved to the Winchester rifle in its scabbard, an instinct born from too many years of war and frontier violence. He scanned the white expanse ahead. Nothing moved. The wind had died completely. In that silence, he heard his own heartbeat, the creak of frozen leather, the mare's breathing. Then he saw it, a dark line against the snow, not straight like a branch or shadow, irregular, organic. He urged Sable forward and the line resolved into what his mind had already known it was. Blood, fresh enough that it hadn't frozen completely. Red against white, in a trail that led north toward the tree line. Ethan drew the Winchester and worked the lever action, chambering around. The metallic click sounded loud in the frozen quiet. He followed the blood trail at a walk, eyes moving constantly, checking his flanks and rear. After 200 yards, the trail widened. Something had been dragged here. The snow was churned up, dark with frozen blood and other fluids he chose not to identify. He saw the body before his conscious mind registered what he was seeing. A person lay face down in the snow, half buried by the white powder that had blown over in the night. Dark hair stiff with ice, broad shoulders, the shape of a woman, though larger than most women he knew. He dismounted, rifle ready, and approached on foot. No movement, no breath that he could see. He knelt beside the figure and reached out with his free hand, touching the neck to check for a pulse. The skin was cold, colder than flesh should be. He almost pulled back, assuming death, but then he felt it, faint, slow, but there. A pulse. She was alive. Ethan holstered the rifle and rolled her over carefully. An Apache woman. He knew it immediately from her features, from the style of clothing visible beneath the snow. Her face was broad and strong, high cheekbones dusted with frost, a scar running from her left cheekbone down to her jaw. Her lips had gone blue. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Her hands were bound behind her back with manila rope, the kind used for tying livestock. He pulled his knife and cut through the bindings. The rope fell away, and he saw the marks beneath, deep grooves in the flesh where she had fought against the bonds. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. He unbuttoned his coat to check the rest of her. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the detachment of a man who had seen too many battlefield wounds to be squeamish. Her back was a ruin of scars. Whip marks, old and new, layered over each other in a map of suffering. Some of the newer wounds had become infected. He could smell it even in the cold air. On her left wrist, just above where the rope had bitten in, he saw something that made him pause. A brand. The letter D burned into her flesh with hot iron, the way you marked cattle or horses to show ownership. The brand was relatively fresh, weeks old, not months. Ethan looked around. The snow stretched empty in all directions. No riders, no pursuers. But there were tracks. A wagon had passed through here, heading east. The tracks were old, maybe 6 or 8 hours. Whoever had done this was long gone. The woman's breathing hitched. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ethan leaned close and felt the faint warmth of her breath against his ear. She was trying to say something, trying to live. He thought of Margaret, his wife, 3 years dead. She had lain in his arms much like this, bleeding out from the arrow in her chest, trying to speak, her life draining away while he held her and could do nothing. He remembered the exact weight of her body, the way her eyes had fixed on something beyond him, beyond everything. He had failed her, failed his son. Come home 3 days too late to save either of them from the Apache raid that had left his cabin burning and his family dead. For 3 years he had carried that failure like a stone in his chest. This woman would not die. Not today, not in the snow, not while he still had breath. Ethan stood and whistled for Sable. The mare came immediately, well-trained and steady. He lifted the woman as gently as he could. She was heavier than Margaret had been. Solid muscle and bone, a lifetime of hard living written into her flesh. He draped her across the saddle and mounted behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her secure. He should have ridden to town, should have taken her to the doctor, reported finding her, followed proper procedure. But Ethan knew what would happen if he brought an Apache woman into Bitter Ridge. The town still seethed with old hatreds. Too many men there had lost family to Apache raids. They would not see a victim. They would see an enemy. And if word got out she was wanted, if someone recognized her from a poster, they would hang her from the nearest tree before the circuit judge could ride through. So Ethan turned Sable west instead of south, toward his cabin, 6 miles outside of town, hidden in the pine forest where no one came unless invited. He urged the mare into a faster walk, conscious of the woman's fading pulse, the way her body had gone limp and heavy in his grip. The sun touched the horizon as they entered the tree line. Shadows stretched long and blue across the snow. The temperature was dropping. It would be 15 below zero by midnight. Cold enough to kill, he needed to get her inside. Get her warm. Everything else could wait. The cabin appeared through the pines, a low structure of logs and stone that Ethan had built himself after the war. It was modest, one main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom in back, a covered porch facing south. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but the fire had died while he was gone. The windows were dark. He dismounted and carried the woman inside, kicking the door open because his hands were full. The interior was cold and dim. He laid her on the bed in the main room and immediately set about building a fire. His hands worked automatically. Kindling first, then larger pieces, a match struck against stone. The flame caught and grew. While the fire built, Ethan returned to the woman. He needed to get her out of the wet clothes, needed to assess the damage. He worked quickly, clinically, removing the torn buckskin dress, the ragged leggings, boots that had more holes than leather. Underneath, her body told a story he did not want to read but could not ignore. Bruises, fresh ones and old ones, yellow and purple, and black. Her ribs showed signs of having been broken and healed poorly. The whip scars on her back continued around to her sides, as if someone had held her down and struck her systematically. Her feet showed signs of frostbite. The toes on her right foot had gone white and waxy. Ethan wrapped her in every blanket he owned, 3 layers of wool and fur. He filled 2 glass bottles with hot water from the kettle he kept near the fire and placed them under the blankets near her feet. Not too close. Too much heat too fast would cause tissue damage. He had learned that during the war. Her core temperature was critically low. He checked her pulse again. 38 beats per minute. Dangerously slow. He needed to warm her gradually, raise her body temperature without shocking her system. It was a delicate balance. Too slow and she would die. Too fast and she would die. Ethan boiled water and mixed it with whiskey and sugar, creating a warm mixture that might help if he could get her to swallow. He lifted her head gently, supporting her neck, and held the cup to her blue lips. Most of the liquid ran down her chin, but some went in. She swallowed reflexively. A good sign. Her body still had the will to live, even if her mind had fled somewhere beyond reach. He worked through the night. Every 30 minutes, he checked her pulse, her breathing, the color of her skin. He rotated the hot water bottles, keeping them warm but not scalding. He tended the fire, feeding it steadily, keeping the cabin temperature just warm enough. Too hot, and she would go into shock as her frozen blood vessels dilated. Too cold, and she would simply slip away. Around midnight, her pulse began to strengthen. 50 beats per minute, then 55. The blue tinge left her lips. Her breathing, which had been so shallow as to be almost invisible, deepened into something more substantial. Ethan sat in his chair near the fire and watched her. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but he did not let them close. Not yet. She was not stable yet. He had seen men in the war rally briefly before dying, had held their hands while they thanked him for saving them, only to watch the light fade from their eyes minutes later. He thought about the brand on her wrist. The letter D. Someone had marked her like property. Someone had tied her up, beaten her, left her to die in the snow. And before that, someone had used a whip on her back so many times that the scars had layered over each other into a permanent record of cruelty. Ethan had killed men during the war, had done things he would never speak of, but he had never tortured anyone, had never treated another human being like livestock. The thought of it made something cold and hard settle in his chest, not anger. Anger was hot. This was colder than the snow outside. He did not know who this woman was, did not know her name or her story, but he knew what had been done to her, and he knew that no one, Apache or white or anything else, deserved to be treated that way. As the first gray light of dawn seeped through the window, the woman's eyelids fluttered. Ethan straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Her eyes did not open, but the movement was there. Her body was trying to wake up, trying to return. He waited. Morning came fully, cold and clear. The fire burned low and he fed it again. The woman's pulse had reached 60 beats per minute. Her breathing was steady. The color had returned to her skin, bronze instead of gray. Around 9 in the morning, she woke up. It was not a gentle waking. One moment she was unconscious. The next she was exploding into movement like a trapped animal. She lunged upright, the blankets falling away, and her hand shot out to grab the hunting knife Ethan had left on the bedside table. In one fluid motion, she was on her feet, naked except for the bandages he had wrapped around her worst wounds, and backing toward the wall with the knife held in front of her. Her eyes were wild, not with fear, with rage. And underneath the rage, something deeper and darker. A survival instinct honed by suffering into something sharp enough to cut. Ethan stood slowly, hands visible and empty, making no move toward his gun. He had expected this. Anyone who had been through what she had been through would wake up ready to fight, would see threat in everything, trust in nothing. He kept his voice low and steady, the same tone he used with spooked horses. Easy. She said nothing. Her eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits, weapons, threats. The knife trembled slightly in her grip, but her stance was solid. Whoever she was, she knew how to hold a blade. Her gaze fell on her own body, saw the bandages, saw that she was undressed. Her expression flickered, a momentary crack in the armor, and for just an instant, Ethan saw the fear underneath. The violation she expected, the violence she had learned to anticipate. Then the armor slammed back into place. She looked at him and spoke. The words came out rough, her throat damaged from cold and screaming. She spoke in Apache first, rapid and harsh, then switched to English, broken but understandable. "Where am I?" "My cabin," Ethan said. He still had not moved. "Found you in the snow, yesterday evening. You were dying." She looked down at herself again, at the bandages covering her back, her wrists, her feet, at the blankets heaped on the bed, at the fire burning warm in the hearth. Her grip on the knife tightened. "You help?" "Yes." The word hung in the air between them. She searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the violence that would surely come. Ethan waited. He had learned patience in the war, had learned that sometimes the best thing a man could do was stand still and let the world settle around him. Why? It was the simplest question and the hardest to answer. Why save an Apache woman? Why risk the town's anger? Why care at all about a stranger, an enemy, someone whose people had killed his family? "Because you were dying," Ethan said. It was not enough. He could see it in her eyes. She did not believe in simple kindness. Why would she? But it was the only answer he had. He could not explain to her that he was tired of death, that he had seen too much of it, that for 3 years he had been going through the motions of living while feeling nothing. And then he had found her in the snow and felt something crack open inside him. Not pity, not mercy, just the simple, stubborn refusal to let one more person die when he could prevent it. The woman's eyes moved past him to the door. It was closed but not locked. She could run, get out before whatever trap this was snapped shut. Ethan saw the calculation in her expression, saw her weighing her chances. Then his words registered. She looked back at him. "Where is Dor?" Ethan turned slowly, telegraphing his movements so she would not see threat, and walked to the door. He opened it. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and snow. The morning outside was brilliant and freezing. "There," he said. "You want to leave? Go. Won't stop you." He stepped aside, leaving the path clear, giving her the choice. She stared at him, then at the open door, then back at him. The knife remained steady in her hand. For a long moment, nothing moved except the wind outside and the flames in the hearth. Ethan could see her thinking, could almost hear the calculations running through her mind. The cold outside versus the warmth inside. The devil she knew versus the devil she did not. Freedom versus survival. She looked at the door again, at the white landscape beyond, at the miles of frozen wilderness between here and anything resembling safety. She wore no clothes, had no food. Her feet were damaged. She would not last an hour out there. But more than that, Ethan realized she was tired. So deeply tired that even the instinct to flee was eroded by exhaustion. She had been running, had been fighting, had been surviving by force of will alone. And for just this moment, with the warmth of the fire on her skin and her body finally, mercifully not in immediate danger, she did not have the strength to run anymore. She did not lower the knife, but she did not run either. Ethan waited another moment, then slowly closed the door. The cold air retreated. The cabin felt warmer by contrast. He moved back to his chair, giving her space, letting her have the weapon and the wall and whatever small measure of control that provided. "There's soup," he said. "I'll leave it here." He ladled venison stew into a bowl from the pot hanging near the fire. The stew had been simmering since yesterday, made from the last deer he had shot. He set the bowl on the floor, midway between himself and her, then retreated 3 full steps. She watched him with those dark, unreadable eyes. The knife never wavered. But after a moment, after he had settled back into his chair and made no move toward her, she crept forward. Her movements were careful, controlled. She kept her back to the wall and her eyes on him as she crouched and picked up the bowl. She ate standing up, did not sit, did not relax. The soup was hot, and she burned her mouth on the first spoonful, but she did not stop eating. She was starving. Ethan could see it in the way she held the bowl, in the intensity with which she ate. This was not a woman who had been fed regularly. This was a woman who had learned to take food when she could get it, because she never knew when the next meal would come. When the bowl was empty, she set it down on the floor and straightened. Some of the tension had left her shoulders. Not much, but some. Food in the belly had a way of making the world seem slightly less hostile. Ethan had not moved from his chair. He sat with his hands visible, resting on his knees, unthreatening, patient. "My name is Ethan," he said. "Ethan Cole." She said nothing, but her eyes flickered, processing, storing the information. "You don't have to tell me yours," he continued. "Don't have to tell me anything. But if you're going to stay, even just for tonight, it might help to have something to call you." More silence. The fire crackled. Outside, a raven called, harsh and lonely in the frozen morning. Ethan was not sure she would answer, was prepared to sit in silence for as long as it took. He had nowhere else to be. Then she spoke. Her voice was still rough, but stronger than before. "Ayana." The name hung in the air like a prayer. Ethan nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "Ayana saw him," he repeated. The syllables felt strange in his mouth, but he spoke them carefully with respect. "It's a good name." She said nothing to that, but something in her eyes softened, just fractionally. A name was a powerful thing. A name meant you saw someone as human, not as object or enemy or problem to be solved. She had given him her name. It was not trust, not yet, but it was not complete hostility either. It was a beginning. The rest of that first day passed in careful silence. Ethan gave her one of his shirts and a pair of pants, both too large but clean and warm. He did not watch while she dressed. Instead, he busied himself outside, chopping wood, checking on Sable, giving Ayana privacy and space. When he returned, she was sitting near the fire, the knife still in her hand but held loosely now. She had wrapped herself in one of the blankets like a shawl. Her eyes tracked him as he entered, but she did not flinch. Progress. Ethan set about making dinner. More stew, this time with potatoes and wild onions he had stored in the cold cellar. He cooked in silence, letting the sounds of domesticity fill the cabin. The crackle of fire, the bubble of boiling water, the soft thump of knife on cutting board. Normal sounds, safe sounds, sounds that said this was a place where people lived, not a place where they were hurt. As darkness fell outside, Ayana finally set the knife down. Not far from her reach, but down. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, staring into the flames. Ethan served dinner in 2 bowls. He brought one to her, set it within reach, then retreated with his own bowl to his chair. They ate in silence. When they were finished, when the bowls were empty and the night had grown full dark outside, Ethan stood and checked the door, made sure it was secure but not locked. She needed to know she was not a prisoner. "You can sleep in the bed," he said. "I'll take the chair." Ayana's eyes moved from him to the bed, to the chair and back. She said nothing, but after a moment she rose and moved to the bed. She lay down on top of the blankets, fully dressed, the knife clutched in her hand. Her eyes remained open, watching him. Ethan settled into his chair near the fire. He was tired, had not slept in more than 30 hours. But he would not sleep tonight either. Not deeply. He would keep watch. Not because he did not trust her, but because she needed to see that he meant what he said, that she was safe here, that no one would hurt her while she slept. The fire burned low. Outside, the temperature dropped. The cabin creaked and settled. And somewhere in the hours before dawn, Ethan heard Ayana's breathing change, heard it deepen into the rhythm of true sleep. The knife slipped from her fingers and fell onto the blanket beside her. Ethan closed his eyes then, just for a moment, just to rest them, and found himself thinking about Margaret, about Thomas, his son, about how they had died while he was away, about how he had spent 3 years believing he had nothing left to live for. And now there was a wounded Apache woman sleeping in his bed, a woman whose name he barely knew, a woman who might leave in the morning and never look back, a woman who represented everything the town of Bitter Ridge would hate and fear. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her sleeping form, at the rise and fall of her breathing, at the scars visible even through his oversized shirt, at the brand on her wrist, the letter D stark against her bronze skin. No, he thought, she will not leave. Not yet. She is too weak, too hurt. She needs time, and if she stays, they will come for her. Whoever did this, whoever owns that brand, they will come. Let them, Ethan thought. Let them come. The fire burned down to embers. The night deepened. And in that small cabin at the edge of the wilderness, 2 damaged people found something they had both lost. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it, the faint, fragile beginning. Tomorrow would bring its own problems. But tonight, for this one cold December night, they were both still alive. And sometimes, Ethan thought, as sleep finally claimed him, sometimes that was enough. Sometimes survival was its own kind of victory. Morning came to the cabin on the 6th day with a quality of light that seemed almost painful in its clarity. Ethan woke to find the fire burned down to embers and Ayana already awake, standing at the window with one of his blankets wrapped around her shoulders. She was watching the way sunlight caught on ice crystals, turning the world outside into something that glittered like broken glass. He did not speak immediately, did not want to break whatever moment she was having. Instead, he rose quietly and began rebuilding the fire, adding kindling first, then larger pieces of split pine. The wood caught quickly, flames licking upward with soft, crackling sounds that filled the cabin's silence. Ayana turned from the window. In the growing light, Ethan could see that she looked different than she had that first terrible day. Color had returned to her face. The blue tinge was gone from her lips. Her eyes, though still guarded, held less of that wild, trapped animal fear. She was healing, slowly but healing nonetheless. She watched him work at the fire with that same careful attention she gave everything. Studying, learning, mapping the routines and rhythms of this small domestic world she had found herself in. When he put the coffee pot on to boil, she moved closer, observing the process. How much coffee? How much water? The way he set it at just the right distance from the flames. Ethan poured the coffee when it was ready, 2 tin cups that had seen better days. He set one on the rough wooden table and gestured to it. Ayana approached, picked up the cup, wrapped both hands around it for warmth. The gesture was becoming familiar now, this small ritual of shared morning coffee. Coffee, Ethan said, pointing to the cup in her hands. She looked at him, understanding this was another lesson in the ongoing education they had begun. She repeated the word carefully, her tongue struggling with the English sounds. Coffee. Close enough, Ethan said with a small smile. He pointed to other objects around the cabin. The door, the window, the table, the chair. Each time speaking the English words slowly and clearly. Each time she repeated it, her pronunciation improving with each attempt. Then she began to offer her own language in return. She touched the coffee cup and said something in Apache that sounded like Tago. She pointed to the fire and said ku. The door was dog ha. The knife she had finally stopped carrying everywhere was beish. Ethan repeated each word, his mouth clumsy around these foreign sounds. His pronunciation was terrible, he knew. The Apache language had sounds that English simply did not contain. Subtle differences in tone and glottal stops that his tongue could not quite manage. But he tried, and Ayana did not mock his attempts. Sometimes her mouth would quirk in what might have been amusement when he completely butchered a word, but she would patiently repeat it until he got closer to correct. This became their morning routine. Coffee and language lessons, simple and quiet and strangely intimate. Two people from completely different worlds, teaching each other the words to bridge the gap between them. After coffee, they fell into the work that needed doing. Winter in the high country was unforgiving, and survival required constant attention to details. Firewood needed cutting. Snow needed clearing from the roof before its weight became dangerous. The horses needed tending. Food needed preparing. The list was endless. Ayana began helping without being asked. On the third day of her recovery, she had simply stood up and followed Ethan outside when he went to chop wood. He had tried to wave her back inside, concerned about her still healing injuries, but she had ignored him. Instead, she picked up the pieces he split and began stacking them in neat rows against the cabin wall. They worked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now. The kind that comes between people who understand that not every moment needs filling with words. The rhythmic thunk of the axe biting into wood. The scrape of logs being stacked. The soft sound of their breathing in the cold air. These sounds created their own kind of conversation. Ethan found himself watching her as they worked. She moved with economy and purpose. No wasted motion. Despite the bandages still wrapped around her wrists, despite the whip scars that must have pulled and ached with every movement, she did not slow down or complain. She had clearly lived a life where work was survival, where pulling your weight was the difference between being tolerated and being abandoned. On the fourth day after they had eaten a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and salt pork, Ethan made a decision. He went to the corner where he kept his weapons and brought out the Winchester Model 1873. It was a beautiful rifle, lever action, well-maintained, chambered for .44-40 ammunition. The gun that had won the West, people called it. Ethan had carried it through enough situations to trust his life to it. He set it on the table and looked at Ayana. You should know how to use this. She approached the rifle cautiously as if it might bite, but her eyes showed interest, maybe even recognition. She had seen rifles before, had probably used them before, though Ethan did not yet know enough about her past to be certain. He picked up the rifle and began demonstrating. Winchester Model 1873, he said, speaking slowly so she could follow. Lever action. You work it like this. He showed her how to operate the lever, how it ejected the spent cartridge, and loaded a fresh round in one smooth motion. Magazine holds 15 rounds. You load them here. He demonstrated loading, his movements deliberate and clear. Ayana watched intently, absorbing every detail. When he handed her the rifle, she took it with confidence that surprised him. She checked the weight, found the balance point, brought it to her shoulder in a smooth, practiced motion. Not her first rifle, not even close. You've done this before, Ethan observed. My husband teach me. Long ago. It was the first time she had mentioned having a husband. The words came out flat, emotionless, but Ethan heard the loss underneath them. They went outside where Ethan had set up a makeshift range. Pine cones balanced on fence posts at varying distances, 20 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards. He showed her how to sight the rifle, how to account for wind and distance, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. Then he stepped back and let her try. The first shot went wide, but not by much. She was sighting for someone taller. She adjusted her stance without being told, bringing the rifle down slightly, compensating for the difference in their heights. The second shot hit dead center on the closest pine cone, exploding it into fragments. She worked the lever action and fired again. And again. 6 shots in 20 seconds, 5 direct hits. The one miss was at the 100-yard mark, and even that was close, splintering the fence post just below the target. Ethan watched with growing respect. This was not beginner's luck. This was muscle memory, training that had been drilled in until it became instinct. Whoever her husband had been, he had taught her well. "Good," he said simply when she lowered the rifle. Ayanna looked at him, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small curve of her lips that lasted only a moment. But it transformed her face, made her look younger, less weighed down by whatever horrors she had survived. That evening, after they had eaten dinner and the cabin had settled into its nightly quiet, the moment Ethan had been both dreading and knowing must come finally arrived. He needed to understand, needed to know the full story, because if he was going to protect her, if he was going to stand between her and whatever was coming, he needed to know what he was protecting her from. He poured them both coffee and sat down at the table. Ayanna sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her cup. The fire crackled between them. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant ocean waves. "What happened to you?" Ethan asked quietly. "How did you end up in that snow?" For a long moment, Ayanna said nothing. She stared into her coffee as if it held answers. Her jaw worked, muscles clenching and unclenching. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry but haunted. "It's a long story," she said. "We've got time." So she told him. The words came slowly at first, halting and broken as she searched for English equivalents to Apache concepts. But as she continued, as the story poured out of her, the words came faster, more fluid, as if speaking it aloud was lancing a wound that had festered too long. She had been born in the mountains of New Mexico territory, she said, part of a small band of Mimra's Apache who had tried to live according to the old ways while accommodating the reality of white expansion. It was a precarious balance, one that required constant negotiation, constant surrender of small pieces of identity and tradition. Her name, Ayanna, meant eternal blossom in her language. Her father had given it to her because she had been born in early spring when the desert flowers covered the mountains in impossible colors. He had been a warrior, respected and strong. Her mother had been skilled in the healing arts, knowing which plants could cure and which could kill. She had grown up learning both paths, how to fight from her father, how to heal from her mother. She could track a deer for 3 days without losing the trail, could identify every plant within 100 miles and tell you its uses, could shoot a bow with accuracy that impressed even the most skilled hunters, could survive on her own in country that would kill most white men within a week. When she was 20, she had married Natan. He was a warrior like her father, strong and brave, with a laugh that could fill a canyon. They had been happy, she said, in the way that people can be happy when they know their happiness is temporary, built on sand that shifts with every political wind. 3 winters passed. In the spring of 1876, soldiers had come to their camp. There had been reports of raids, of stolen cattle, of violence. The band insisted they had honored the treaty, had been nowhere near the attacked ranches. But the soldiers had not come to talk. They had come with guns and torches in the absolute certainty of their righteousness. The fight had been brief and brutal. Natan had died defending the camp, a lance in his hand and defiance in his eyes. Ayanna's voice did not waver when she spoke of this, but Ethan saw her hands tighten around the coffee cup until her knuckles went white. After the attack, after the soldiers left and the survivors scattered, Ayanna had found herself alone. Her parents were long dead. She had no children, no siblings, no close family remaining. She was 24 years old and completely untethered from everything she had known. For nearly 2 years, she had survived on the edges of both worlds. Apache bands would give her shelter sometimes, share food, let her travel with them for a few weeks before moving on. Other times, she would trade with Mexican settlements, offering her skills as a hunter or healer in exchange for supplies. She existed in the liminal spaces, belonging nowhere, accepted nowhere fully, but tolerated enough to survive. Last spring in April of 1878, everything had changed. She had been hunting deer in the foothills near the Rio Grande when the Comancheros found her. Comancheros, she explained, were the worst kind of men, Mexican and American bandits who preyed on everyone and everything, who traded in guns and whiskey and human flesh. They recognized no law but profit, respected no life but their own. They were ghosts that haunted the borderlands, appearing and disappearing like smoke. They had come up behind her while she was field dressing a deer she had killed, had hit her from behind with something heavy before she could reach for her knife. When she woke, she was in chains, iron shackles around her wrists and ankles, a rope around her neck like a leash. They had stripped her of her weapons, her dignity, her freedom. The Comancheros had taken her south, to Silver City in New Mexico territory, a rough mining camp where men dug for gold and silver in the mountains, far from any law enforcement that might care what happened to an Apache woman. They had sold her to the miners for $30, less than the cost of a good horse. Ayana's voice went flat when she described what came next, as if she was reading from a list rather than recounting her own life. At the mining camp, she had been forced to work, hauling water up from the creek in heavy buckets, cooking for 30 men over fires that burned her hands, washing clothes in freezing water, cleaning out the sluices where they separated gold from rock and mud. The work was endless, brutal, with no rest except when exhaustion made her collapse. And the beatings. The beatings came for any reason or no reason. Too slow, too wisitinayapas. Looking at someone wrong, not looking at someone at all. The whip marks on her back had been laid down over months, layer upon layer, until her flesh was more scar than skin. She had learned to work through the pain, to keep moving no matter what, because stopping meant more punishment. One of the miners, a man named James Cutler, had claimed her as his personal property. He had papers, she said with bitter emphasis, legal documents that somehow made slavery acceptable again if the slave was not white, if the slave was Indian or Mexican or Chinese. The 13th Amendment meant nothing on the frontier where no one was watching and everyone looked away. Cutler had branded her with a hot iron, the same one used for marking mules and cattle. The letter D for Doyle, the man he had supposedly bought her from. The pain of the branding had been extraordinary, beyond anything the whip had done. The smell of her own flesh burning, the sizzle of iron on skin. She had screamed until her throat was raw, and they had laughed. Ethan's hands had clenched into fists as she spoke. He forced them to relax, to remain still, but inside something cold and hard was forming. A rage so deep it had no heat, only the terrible absoluteness of winter. Cutler had wanted more than labor, Ayana continued. Had come to her at night, drunk on whiskey, hands rough and entitled. Had told her she was his property, that she had no rights, no say, that her body belonged to him just like her labor did. When she had fought him, when she had scratched and bit and refused, he had beaten her until ribs cracked. Had told her that resistance was pointless, that she was nothing, that she should be grateful he did not simply kill her and be done with it. For months, this had been her life. Work and pain and fear and rage with nowhere to put it. She had thought about running, but the mountains around Silver City were unforgiving, and she had no supplies, no weapons, no way to survive. She had thought about killing herself, but some stubborn part of her refused to give them that satisfaction. So she endured and waited and looked for any opportunity. The opportunity came in August. Cutler had announced he was selling her again. To a brothel in Santa Fe. $50, he said. That was her worth now. A used Apache woman who was too much trouble to keep. The brothel owner would break her properly, he said with a laugh. Would teach her to be grateful for male attention. That night, Ayana had made her decision. She would die free or not at all. She had waited until Cutler drank himself into his usual stupor, until he lay snoring in his tent with his mouth open and drool on his chin. Then she had picked up a rock the size of her fist, a chunk of granite heavy and solid, and she had brought it down on his skull. The first blow stunned him, the second cracked bone, the third made sure he would never wake up. She had hit him with all the rage and terror and humiliation of the last 5 months concentrated into her hands, had felt his skull give way, had heard the wet crunch of brain and bone, had seen his eyes flutter and go still. Then she had taken his horse, his knife, his canteen, and what little food she could grab, and she had run. Ridden hard into the night, heading north and west, using every skill her husband and father had taught her to cover her trail. The other miners had discovered Cutler's body at dawn and immediately given chase, but she had hours of head start and the knowledge of how to disappear that came from being Apache. For 4 days she had run, sleeping only in brief snatches, eating nothing but what she could grab along the way, pushing herself and the horse to the breaking point. She had heard pursuit behind her, distant shouts and the occasional gunshot, but she stayed ahead of them, used every trick she knew, doubled back, waded through streams, traveled over rock where hooves left no prints. Then the snow had come, early and heavy, a freak storm that turned the world white in a matter of hours. She had lost the horse when it stumbled into a ravine hidden by the snow, had lost her supplies when she fell trying to climb out, had kept moving on foot because stopping meant freezing, meant dying, meant letting them win. But the cold had been relentless. It sapped her strength, numbed her extremities, made thinking difficult and then impossible. She had fallen and could not get up, had lain in the snow feeling it cover her, feeling her body shut down piece by piece, had thought in those final moments before consciousness fled that at least she would die free, Trobi, that they would never take her alive, that even in death she had won a kind of victory. And then Ethan had found her. When Ayanna finished speaking, the cabin was completely silent except for the wind and the fire. Ethan sat motionless, his coffee long since gone cold, his hands still and careful on the table because he did not trust what they might do if he let them move. He was trying to process what he had heard, trying to reconcile the horror of her story with the simple fact of her sitting across from him, alive and whole and human. And finally he found his voice. "You did what you had to do." Ayanna looked at him steadily. Her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears long ago, Ethan realized. Now there was only the hard, unflinching reality of survival. "Your law says I am murderer," she said. "My law is wrong." The words came out harder than he intended, more absolute, but he meant them with every fiber of his being. He had enforced the law for 6 years, had believed in its fairness, its necessity, its fundamental justice. But if the law said this woman was a murderer for defending herself, for refusing to be sold like livestock, for choosing life over slavery, then the law was not just wrong, it was evil, and he would not serve evil. They sat in silence for a while longer. The fire burned low and Ethan added more wood. The flames leaped up, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Finally, Ayanna stood and moved to the bed. She lay down, pulling the blankets over herself. Within minutes, her breathing had evened into the deep rhythm of sleep. The sleep of someone who had finally, after months of running and hiding and fearing, found a moment of safety. Ethan remained by the fire, thinking, knowing that this moment, this fragile peace, could not last, knowing that the world outside this cabin would not allow it to last, and knowing with absolute certainty that he would fight to protect it anyway, would stand between her and whatever came, no matter the outcome. Morning came too soon, bringing with it Jacob Brennan. Jake was 50 years old, weathered by sun and wind, and a life spent outdoors. He had been Ethan's deputy for 3 years, a steady, reliable presence who asked few questions and did his job without complaint. He had fought in the war on the Union side, same as Ethan, though they had not known each other then. It was only after, when both had drifted west looking for something they could not name, that they had found each other in Bitter Ridge. Ethan trusted Jake as much as he trusted anyone, which was why, when he heard the horse approaching the cabin just after dawn, he knew immediately who it was. And he knew that whatever Jake was bringing, it was not going to be good news. He met Jake outside, closing the cabin door firmly behind him. The morning was brutally cold, 20 below zero at least, with frost thick on every surface. Jake sat on his horse, breath steaming, his expression troubled. "Ethan," Jake said by way of greeting. He did not dismount. His hand rested on his saddle horn, but his eyes were serious, apologetic. "We need to talk." "About?" Jake reached into his heavy coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it down. The paper was stiff with cold. Ethan unfolded it and felt his chest constrict. A wanted poster, cheaply printed but clear enough. At the top, in bold letters, Wanted. Below that, a description that matched Ayanna perfectly. Apache woman, age 25 to 30, height approximately 5'9", scar on left cheek, strong build. Below that, the charges. Murder of James Cutler, escape from legal custody, destruction of property. And at the bottom, the reward, $200. Contact H. Doyle, Silver City, New Mexico territory. $200, more than most men made in 6 months. Enough to make even honest men think twice about looking the other way. Words out, Jake said quietly. His voice held genuine regret. Billy came to me yesterday, your nephew. Said he saw you riding back with someone day before last. Said it looked like an Indian woman. Then this showed up at Silas's saloon this morning. Came in with the mail coach. Silas made sure everyone saw it. He's gathering folks. They're talking. Ethan looked up from the poster. Talking about what? About justice, about safety, about how we got an Apache living among us, wanted for murder, about how the sheriff might be harboring a fugitive. Jake's expression was pained, the look of a man caught between loyalty to a friend and duty to the law. Ethan, you know I trust you. Fought beside you at Antietam. Saw what you're made of. But this is bad. Town's already on edge about Indians. Last raid was only 3 years back. Silas lost his wife and daughter. Half the folks here lost someone. Memories are long and hate is cheap. She's not a raider, Ethan said flatly. You know that. I might even believe it. But Silas, he's not going to see anything but an Apache woman wanted for killing a white man. He's going to see his family all over again. And he's going to want blood for blood. Ethan crumpled the poster in his fist. Let him try. Jake sighed, a long, weary exhalation that spoke of too many years seeing good men make bad choices. That's what I was afraid you'd say. He gathered his reins, preparing to leave. There's a town meeting tonight, 7 o'clock at the hall. Silas called it. You should probably be there, should probably bring her too. Let people see she's human. Or, he paused, choosing his words carefully, or get her out of here before this turns into something nobody can stop. I'm not running. Didn't think you would. Just needed to say it anyway. For my conscience. Jake turned his horse, then looked back. Ethan, whatever you're planning, think hard on it. Because you're about to make a choice that's going to define the rest of your life. And probably hers too. He rode off before Ethan could respond, horse and rider disappearing into the pine trees, leaving only hoof prints in the snow to mark their passage. Ethan stood in the cold for a long moment, feeling the weight of what was coming settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. He looked down at the crumpled, wanted poster in his hand. $200. Her life reduced to a number. A bounty? A piece of property to be returned to its rightful owner. He thought about Cutler branding her like a cow, about the whip scars layered on her back, about the way she had woken up that first morning ready to fight, expecting violence because violence was all she had known for months, about the small smile she had given him yesterday when she made a perfect shot with his rifle. No, he thought, no more. Not her. Not while I'm still breathing. He went back inside. Ayanna was awake, dressed in the clothes Ruth had brought, standing near the fire with the knife in her hand. She had heard everything. The cabin walls were thin and voices carried. They come for me, she said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had been hunted before and knew how it ended. Not yet, but they're talking about it. There's a meeting tonight. I should leave. Before they come. Before you are in danger for helping me. No. The word came out sharp, definite, leaving no room for argument. Ayanna looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. You do not understand, she said, frustration creeping into her voice. White people hate Apache. They will hurt you for helping me. They will say you are traitor. They will take your badge. Maybe worse, or so. Let them try. Why? Her voice rose now, the careful control slipping. Why risk everything for me? You do not know me. I am nothing to you. I am just Apache woman who brought you trouble. Ethan crossed the space between them in 3 steps. He looked into her eyes, those dark, defiant eyes that had seen too much and still refused to break. You're a person who deserves to live, he said quietly. That's enough. They stared at each other across the small space of the cabin. Outside, wind rattled the windows. The fire crackled, and something passed between them. Some understanding that went deeper than words or language or culture, or a recognition of shared stubbornness, shared refusal to bend, shared conviction that some things were worth standing for no matter the cost. Tonight there's a meeting, Ethan said. The whole town. They're going to talk about you, about what to do. I need to be there. And me? You stay here. Keep the rifle loaded and close. If anyone comes besides me, May or Jake, you shoot first and ask questions later. Understand? Ayana nodded slowly. Then before Ethan could move away, she reached out and touched his arm. Just a brief contact, her fingers light against his sleeve. It was only the second time she had voluntarily touched him. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing me. Not just Apache, not just slave, but me, Ayana, person. Ethan did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just nodded once and began preparing for the evening ahead. Preparing for the fight he knew was coming. Preparing to stand in front of his town and defend a woman most of them would rather see dead. The town hall of Bitter Ridge was packed when Ethan arrived that evening. Every bench was filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding in the doorway. He counted at least 50 people, maybe more. Ranchers in their work clothes, shopkeepers in vests and ties, women in their best dresses, even children, wide-eyed and excited by the drama of it all. The air was thick with pipe smoke and tension. Voices rumbled low, conversations stopping when Ethan entered. He felt the weight of their eyes on him, saw judgment there, fear, anger. The old hatreds that never really died just waited for excuse to resurface. Silas Grayson stood at the front of the hall near the podium. He was a tall man, 6'2" at least, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the weather too long. He was 41 years old but looked older, aged by grief that had turned to bitterness that had turned to hate. His wife and daughter had died in an Apache raid 3 years back. Ethan had been the one to find their bodies. The memory of it still woke him some nights. Good of you to join us, Sheriff, Silas said as Ethan walked down the center aisle. His tone made it clear it was anything but good. We were just discussing our little problem. What problem would that be? Ethan kept his voice level, his hand deliberately away from his gun. Not a threat, not yet, but the potential was there hanging in the air like smoke. The Apache killer you're hiding in your cabin, Silas said flatly. A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Ethan felt the temperature in the room shift, felt the hostility crystallize into something more dangerous. He held his ground, meeting eyes, refusing to look away. I found a woman dying in the snow, Ethan said. His voice cut through the murmur, clear and hard. I brought her back, kept her alive. That's not hiding a fugitive. That's human decency. She murdered a white man, someone shouted from the back. Ethan could not see who, did not need to. The sentiment was echoed in a dozen faces. She killed a man who was trying to sell her to a brothel, Ethan shot back. After keeping her as a slave, after branding her like livestock. There's a difference between murder and self-defense. The law don't see it that way, Silas said. He held up the wanted poster, waving it like a banner. There's a warrant out of New Mexico territory. She's wanted for murder and property destruction. Your job, Sheriff, is to uphold the law, to bring criminals to justice, not to protect them. My job, Ethan said slowly, emphasizing each word, is to keep the peace and enforce justice, not to deliver victims to lynch mobs, not to pretend that pieces of paper make slavery legal, not to stand by while people get hunted like animals. The room erupted, voices overlapping, people shouting, accusations flying. Ethan stood his ground, silent now, letting them rage. He had said what needed saying. The rest would come down to choice, theirs and his. Finally, Reverend Samuel Thorne stood. He was 60 years old, white-haired and gaunt, a Methodist circuit preacher who had been serving Bitter Ridge for 15 years. When he raised his hand for silence, the crowd gradually quieted. Age and authority still commanded respect, even in chaos. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill," Thorne intoned. His voice carried the weight of years spent reading scripture, of certainty built on faith. Also says, do unto others, Ethan replied immediately, and let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Cutler didn't follow those, did he? We are not here to debate scripture, Sheriff, Thorne said stiffly. We are here to discuss the law and public safety. Then let's discuss it properly. A new voice. Ethan turned to see Ruth Kemper standing. She was a solid woman in her late 50s, gray-haired and strong-faced, a widow who had buried her husband and 2 sons but somehow remained kind. She ran the general store and was respected for her fairness and her refusal to extend credit to drunks. The law says she gets a trial, a real trial before a real judge, not whatever mob justice is brewing here. She's Apache, someone muttered from the side. An old-timer named Hoskins who had fought in the Indian Wars and never let anyone forget it. They don't get trials, they get rope. She's human, Ruth shot back, her voice sharp as a slap. Or did I miss the part of the good book that excludes certain people from basic rights based on the color of their skin? An uncomfortable silence fell. People shifted, looked at each other. Some faces hardened, doubling down on their hate. Others, a few, showed uncertainty. Doubt. The first cracks in the monolithic certainty of the mob. Silas sensed the shift, sensed he was losing control of the narrative. There's a federal bounty hunter on his way, he said loudly. Name of Morrison, supposed to arrive any day now. He's got proper warrants signed by a territorial judge. She's going back to New Mexico to stand trial whether you like it or not, Cole. Fine, Ethan said. When Morrison gets here, we'll talk. We'll look at his papers. We'll do it legal and proper. But until then, Ayanna stays where she is, safe, fed, alive, under my protection as an officer of the law. Ayanna, Silas repeated mockingly. You even know her name. How cozy. You sleeping with her too, Sheriff? That why you're so eager to protect her? The accusation hung in the air like poison. Ethan felt rage flare hot in his chest but forced it down, forced his voice to remain level, his hands to stay still. Watch your mouth, Grayson. Or what? You'll shoot me? Prove my point that you've gone Indian lover? That you've betrayed your own people for some Apache whore? Ethan's hand moved to his gun before he could stop himself. The movement was pure instinct, pure rage overriding reason. But Jake was suddenly there, stepping between them, hands up in a gesture of peace. That's enough, Jake said firmly. From both of you, Silas, you're out of line. Ethan, stand down. He looked between them. This gets settled legal, by the courts, not by fists or bullets. We're civilized people here. We act like it. The tension held for another moment, brittle as ice, then Silas stepped back, a cruel smile on his face. He had gotten what he wanted, had shown the town that their sheriff was compromised, that he had chosen sides, that he could not be trusted. Meeting adjourned, Silas said. But mark my words, Cole. Morrison will be here within the week, and when he comes, she's going back, one way or another. People began filing out, their voices low and intense. Ethan remained standing in the center of the hall, watching them go, reading their faces. Some would not meet his eyes, others glared openly. A very few, Ruth among them, gave him small nods of support. When the hall had mostly cleared, Jake approached. That went about as well as a shit sandwich, Jake said quietly. Could have been worse. How? They could have ridden out to the cabin tonight. Could have burned me out, could have taken her by force. Ethan finally let his hand fall away from his gun. This way at least we've got time. Time for what? To figure out how to keep her alive. Jake shook his head slowly. You're in deep, friend, deeper than I've ever seen you. You know that once Morrison gets here with those papers, there's nothing you can do. Federal warrant trumps local authority. You try to stop him, you'll be arrested right alongside her. Then I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Ethan turned to leave. As he reached the door, Ruth caught his arm. Come to my store tomorrow morning, she said quietly. Early, before anyone else is up. I've got something you need to know. She did not wait for his response, just squeezed his arm once and left. Ethan rode back to the cabin through darkness so complete it felt like drowning. No moon, no stars, just the endless black of a winter night in the high country, broken only by the faint glow of snow, reflecting starlight too dim to see. The cold bit through every layer he wore. His breath froze on his beard. The horse picked its way carefully, trusting to instinct and memory more than sight. When he arrived at the cabin, he found every window dark except one, the faint glow of a single candle. He knocked rather than just entering, announcing himself. "It's me." The door opened immediately. Ayana stood there with the Winchester in her hands, finger off the trigger but ready. When she saw it was him, she lowered the rifle and stepped aside to let him enter. "What happened?" she asked as soon as the door was closed. Ethan hung up his coat and hat, poured himself coffee that had been sitting too long and tasted like charcoal. Finally, he turned to look at her. "They're angry, scared. A bounty hunter is coming with federal warrants. Jake says he'll be here within the week." Ayana absorbed this information without visible reaction. She had known it was coming, had probably known from the moment Ethan found her that this peace could not last. "I should leave," she said, "tonight, before he comes, before you cannot protect me anymore." "No. Ethan, you do not understand. Federal law is bigger than you, bigger than this town. If you try to stop them, they will destroy you." "Maybe, probably, but I'm not letting you go back to that, back to being property, back to men like Cutler." He set down his coffee and looked at her directly. "You asked me earlier why I'm doing this, why I'm risking everything. You want the real answer?" "Yes. Because for 3 years I've been dead inside, going through the motions, wearing this badge and protecting people and feeling nothing. Then I found you, and for the first time since Margaret and Thomas died, I felt something. Not pity, not duty, just the simple fact that I could not let another person die when I had the power to prevent it." He paused, searching for the right words. "You make me feel like I have a reason again, like there's something worth fighting for." Ayana stared at him. In the candlelight, her eyes looked impossibly dark, reflecting nothing, giving nothing away. Then something in her expression shifted, softened, broke open just slightly. "You are a strange man, Ethan Cole," she said quietly. Good strange, but strange. It was the first time she had smiled at him, really smiled, small and fleeting, but genuine, real. Ethan found himself smiling back, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. They sat up late into the night, talking quietly about everything and nothing, about her life before, about his, about the war and its aftermath, about survival and loss and the stubborn refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. And for a few hours, the world outside the cabin ceased to matter. There was only the warmth of the fire and the sound of their voices and the knowledge that, at least for tonight, they were safe. But outside, in the frozen darkness, 3 riders approached. They stopped their horses on a ridge overlooking the cabin, close enough to see the single candle burning in the window, but far enough away that the sound of their horses would not carry. Morrison sat in the center, a lean, hard man with cold eyes and no conscience. On either side of him, 2 hired guns that Doyle had sent along. Insurance, Doyle had called them, to make sure the job got done. "That's the place," Morrison said. "Sheriff's cabin, 4 miles outside of town, isolated, no neighbors." "Can't just take her," one of the gunmen muttered. His name was Pike, and he had killed 6 men in his 30 years. "He's the law. It'll bring federal trouble." Morrison smiled without warmth. "Don't have to take her. Papers will be processed by tomorrow morning. Federal warrant trumps local sheriff. We'll ride in, present the papers, give him one chance to hand her over peaceful. After that," he shrugged, "after that, it's on him if he chooses to resist." They watched a while longer, watched the candle finally go out, watched the cabin settle into darkness. Then they turned their horses and rode back toward town, leaving only hoofprints in the snow to mark their presence. Inside the cabin, unaware of the watchers, Ethan and Ayana finally slept. Him in the chair, her in the bed, both fully dressed and within reach of their weapons. Both knowing that tomorrow would bring new problems. Both knowing that the fragile peace they had built could shatter at any moment. But for now, for this one last quiet night, they rested. And in the frozen heart of winter, in a world determined to tear them apart, that was its own kind of miracle. Small and fragile and desperately worth fighting for. Morning came with Ruth Kemper. Ethan woke to the sound of a wagon rattling up the frozen track to his cabin. wheels crunching over ice and packed snow. He was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window before his mind had fully processed wakefulness. Ayanna was already awake, he saw, crouched near the fireplace with his revolver held steady in both hands. She had learned to sleep light, survival skill. Through the frost-patterned glass, Ethan recognized Ruth's sturdy farm wagon and her gray mare pulling it. He relaxed fractionally, lowering the Winchester but not setting it down. Ruth would not come this early, before full dawn, unless something was urgent. He opened the door as she climbed down from the wagon. Ruth was bundled in layers of wool and fur, her breath steaming in the pre-dawn cold. She carried a large bundle wrapped in oilcloth, heavy enough that she grunted slightly as she lifted it. "Inside," she said without preamble, "before anyone sees me here." Ethan stepped aside. Ruth entered, nodded once to Ayanna, who still held the revolver, and set her bundle on the table. She unwrapped it methodically, revealing 2 dresses of good quality wool, undergarments, stockings, a heavy shawl, and a pair of boots that looked almost new. "Brought proper clothes," Ruth said, looking at Ayanna. "Those men's things are fine for staying warm, but you need something that fits. Had these from when I was younger, before age and baking settled weight in places it didn't used to be. Should fit you well enough." Ayanna set down the revolver slowly and approached the table. She touched the fabric of the dresses with careful fingers, as if they might vanish if handled too roughly. Quality cloth, clean and whole, things she had not owned in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet, honey," Ruth replied, her voice grim. "Thank me when this is over and you are still breathing." She turned to Ethan. "Morrison arrived last night, earlier than expected. Rode in with 2 hard-looking men, the kind that get paid for violence. He's staying at Silas's saloon, showing papers to anyone who'll look. Federal warrant signed by a territorial judge. It all looks legitimate." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "When?" "He says he'll come for her today, noon, giving you time to, quote, do the right thing, unquote." Ruth pulled a folded newspaper from her coat. "But that's not the worst of it. Look at this." She spread the newspaper on the table. It was 3 weeks old, from Santa Fe. On the 3rd page, a small article caught Ethan's eye. The headline read, "Controversial ownership case draws federal attention." Ethan read quickly, his stomach sinking with each sentence. The article described how a man named Hank Doyle had brought suit in federal court, claiming ownership of several individuals based on bills of sale predating the 13th Amendment. The judge had ruled that contracts executed before 1865 remain legally binding if properly documented, regardless of subsequent constitutional amendments. It was a loophole, narrow and technical, but apparently legal. "That's impossible," Ethan said. "The 13th Amendment freed all slaves." "All slaves held under American law at the time," Ruth corrected. "But Doyle's claiming these were Mexican contracts, executed in Mexican territory before it became American territory, which somehow makes them exempt. It's legal horseshit, but it's horseshit that a federal judge upheld." She looked at Ayanna. "And honey, Doyle's got papers saying he bought you in 1864. Before the war ended, before emancipation. If Morrison can prove those papers are real, the law's on his side." "Papers or lies," Ayanna said flatly. "I was not even in that place in 1864. I was child, living with my people in Arizona mountains." "I believe you." "Ethan believes you, but proving it?" Ruth shook her head. "That's another matter. You'd need witnesses, records, things that don't exist for Apache living free in the territories." Ethan paced to the window, thinking hard. The sun was rising now, painting in the snow, gold and pink, beautiful and completely indifferent to human suffering. There has to be a way, some legal avenue. "There is one," Ruth said quietly, "but you're not going to like it." Both Ethan and Ayanna turned to look at her. Ruth met their eyes steadily, her expression serious. "Under territorial law, a married woman cannot be held as property. Marriage grants her citizenship through her husband. It would nullify any ownership claim, even ones with fancy legal precedent." She let that sink in. "You marry her, Ethan, and suddenly she's not property anymore. She's a citizen, a wife, protected by law." Silence filled the cabin. The fire crackled. Outside, a raven called harshly. Ethan felt the weight of the suggestion settle on him like snow accumulating on a roof, inevitable and heavy. He started, then stopped. Tried again. That's asking a lot. It's asking survival, Ruth said bluntly. I know it's not romantic. I know it's not how either of you pictured marriage. But we're talking about life and death here. We're talking about whether Morrison rides out of here alone or with her in chains. Everything else is luxury. She stood and moved toward the door. Reverend Thorne will do it. He's had a change of heart after last night, saw which way the wind was blowing and didn't like it. He'll perform the ceremony private if you want, but you need to decide fast. Morrison's coming at noon. That gives you 6 hours. After Ruth left, the cabin felt smaller somehow, more confined. Ethan and Ayanna stood on opposite sides of the table, the dresses and newspapers spread between them like evidence in a trial. I will not trap you, Ayanna said finally. Her voice was steady, but her hands, Ethan noticed, were clenched into fists. I will not force you into marriage to save myself. That is wrong. Trading one kind of ownership for another. It wouldn't be ownership. Ethan moved around the table, closing the distance between them but not touching. Not yet. It would be partnership, protection, a legal shield against men who think pieces of paper give them the right to own human beings. But you do not love me. You barely know me. I know enough. Ethan held her gaze. I know you're strong. I know you're brave. I know you deserve to live free. And I know, he paused, searching for the right words, I know that I'd rather stand beside you as your husband than watch them take you away in chains. Ayanna's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the ulterior motive. She had been hurt too many times to accept kindness at face value. But whatever she saw in Ethan's expression seemed to satisfy some requirement because her shoulders dropped slightly, tension easing. In my people's way, she said slowly, marriage is sacred, is bond between souls, not just transaction on paper. If we do this, I do not pretend. I choose you as partner, as husband, as man I stand with. You understand? I will not lie about this. I understand. And you choose me, knowing what I am, knowing I killed a man, knowing my people and your people have been enemies? Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her skin was warm and rough with calluses. Real, alive, human. I choose you, Ayanna, not because you need saving, not out of pity or duty, but because in the week I've known you, you've shown me more courage and strength than most men show in a lifetime. Because you make me feel like I have a reason to stand up and fight again. Because, he struggled with the admission, because I've been half dead for 3 years and you're the first thing that's made me want to be fully alive. Her eyes went bright with unshed tears. She did not cry, but her grip on his hand tightened. Then I choose you too, she said. My husband, my shield, my heart. They stood like that for a long moment, hands joined, the weight of what they were committing to settling between them. Then Ayanna pulled back and looked at the dresses Ruth had brought. I should wear something proper, she said. If we do this, we do it right. While Ayanna changed behind a blanket hung for privacy, Ethan cleaned himself up as best he could, shaved with cold water and his straight-edge razor, combed his hair, put on his only good shirt, the one he wore to church on the rare occasions he attended. When Ayanna emerged, he felt his breath catch. The dress was deep blue wool, simple but well-made, and it fit her as if tailored. Her long black hair, which she usually wore loose or in a simple braid, she had arranged in a more complex style with Ruth's help earlier. The effect was transformative. She looked, Ethan thought, like she belonged in a civilized place, like she deserved nice things, like she was someone worth fighting for. You look beautiful, he said, and meant it. A faint blush colored her cheeks. You look, what is word, handsome. They rode to town together on Ethan's horse, arriving at the small church just as the sun cleared the mountains. Reverend Thorne was waiting, as were Jake and Ruth and young Billy, Ethan's nephew. The boy's eyes went wide when he saw Ayanna in the dress. Uncle Ethan, Billy whispered loudly. You're really marrying her? I am. But she's Indian. She's a person, Billy, and she's going to be your aunt. You got a problem with that? Billy thought about this for a moment, then shook his head. No, sir. If you say she's good, then she's good. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Thorne had clearly wrestled with his conscience overnight and emerged on the side of mercy over law. He spoke the traditional words quickly, without elaboration, as if wanting to get through this before he changed his mind or someone stopped him. When it came time for vows, Ethan spoke clearly. I take you as my wife, to protect and honor, to stand with in good times and bad, until death. Ayana's response came partly in Apache, then in English. Shie, my heart, I take you as my husband, to stand beside, to fight with, to trust, until death. They had no rings, no flowers, no celebration. Just Ruth's quiet tears and Jake's firm handshake and Billy's confused but earnest congratulations. Reverend Thorne handed over the marriage certificate, properly signed and witnessed, and wished them well in a tone that suggested he thought they would need all the luck they could get. You're legal now, Ruth said, hugging Ayana carefully. Married in the eyes of God and territory law. That paper is your shield, honey. Don't lose it. They rode back to the cabin with the certificate wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside Ethan's coat. The sun was higher now, the day warming to something almost bearable. 10 below zero instead of 20. Spring was still months away, but the light had changed, held a promise of eventual thaw. At the cabin, Ethan built up the fire while Ayana made coffee. They moved around each other with new awareness, not quite awkward, but conscious of the change. They were married now, husband and wife. The words felt strange and significant. Morrison comes at noon, Ayana said, watching the coffee boil. You think the paper will stop him? It should. Marriage certificate is legal proof of citizenship. He can't claim you as property if you're a citizen married to a sheriff. But he will try. Men like that do not give up easy. No, Ethan agreed, they don't. Noon came with Morrison and his 2 hired guns. Ethan heard them before he saw them. 3 horses approaching at an unhurried walk. He met them outside, rifle in hand, but not pointed at anyone. Not yet. Behind him, inside the cabin, Ayana watched through the window with the revolver ready. Morrison was a lean man in his 40s with eyes like chips of slate, cold and empty. The kind of man who could kill you and forget about it before your body hit the ground. His 2 companions looked cut from similar cloth. Hard men, dangerous men, men who had long ago traded conscience for wages. Sheriff Cole, Morrison said, not dismounting, I'm here on federal business. I have a warrant for the arrest of the Apache woman known as Ayana, wanted for murder and escape from legal custody in New Mexico territory. He pulled out a sheaf of papers and held them up. Even from 15 feet away, Ethan could see the official seals, the signatures. The impressive weight of bureaucracy turned to the purpose of capturing one woman. She's not going anywhere, Ethan said. That's not your decision to make. Federal warrant supersedes local authority. You interfere, you'll be charged with obstruction. She's not a fugitive. She's my wife. That stopped Morrison cold. Kaya. His hand, which had been moving toward his gun, froze. You're what? My wife. Married this morning by Reverend Thorne. Legal and binding under territorial law. Which means she's a citizen. Which means your ownership papers don't mean a damn thing. Ethan pulled out the marriage certificate and unfolded it. Held it up so Morrison could see the signatures. The official church seal. The date. Fresh ink still slightly visible in the cold air. Morrison's face went through several expressions. Surprise. Anger. Then calculation. Convenient timing. Legal timing. You want to challenge it, take it to a judge. But she's not going with you today. Doyle's not going to like this. Doyle can go to hell, along with his forged ownership papers. One of Morrison's companions, a thick-necked man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, spat into the snow. We could just take her, 3 against 1. You'd be dead before you got off 2 shots. Ethan smiled without humor. Maybe, but I'd make sure to take Morrison first. And Jake Brennan's watching from those trees with a Sharps rifle. You'd get me, but you wouldn't get off this property alive. Question is whether your pay is worth dying for. It was a bluff. Jake was in town, not in the trees, but Morrison didn't know that. His eyes flicked to the tree line, looking for the glint of a scope, the silhouette of a hidden shooter. seeing nothing but also seeing nothing that proved Ethan was lying. "This isn't over," Morrison said finally. "I'll be back with a judge, with proper paperwork. And when I come back, that marriage certificate isn't going to save her. We'll see." Morrison wheeled his horse and rode off, his two companions following. They went fast, kicking up snow, their anger visible in the way they spurred their mounts. Ethan stood watching until they disappeared into the trees, then finally allowed himself to breathe. Inside, Ayanna was trembling, not with fear, Ethan realized, but with adrenaline and relief in the aftermath of tension held too long. "You lied," she said. "Jake was not in the trees." "No, but Morrison didn't know that. He will come back." "Yes, but not today. Today we won." Ethan set down his rifle and crossed to her. Without thinking, acting on instinct, he pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment, then relaxed against him, her head coming to rest on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time. Husband and wife, partners against a world that wanted them apart. The afternoon passed quietly. Too quietly. Ethan kept expecting trouble, kept listening for horses, for shouts, for the sounds of violence approaching. But nothing came. The day stretched toward evening with only the normal sounds of winter. Wind, crows, the distant crack of ice on the creek. Ayanna made dinner while Ethan cleaned weapons and checked ammunition. Venison stew with the last of the potatoes from his cold cellar. They ate in companionable silence, the way married people do when words are unnecessary. As darkness fell, Ethan finally spoke what had been on his mind all day. Morrison was right about one thing: he'll be back. With a judge, with more men, with legal arguments we can't counter. This marriage bought us time, but it didn't end the threat. Then what do? We go to Laramie, to Fort Laramie. There's an army post there, federal troops, law that exists outside of territorial politics. And he paused, remembering something Ruth had mentioned. And there are Apache scouts working for the army. Men from different bands who serve as guides and interpreters. If we can find someone who knew you, who can testify that you're not who Doyle claims, we might be able to break his case. Ayanna's eyes lit up with something Ethan had not seen before. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that comes from having no other options, but the genuine article. "Yellowhawk," she breathed. "My cousin. He went to work for the Army 2 years ago. Last I heard he was at Fort Laramie. If he is still there, if he will speak for me, he can prove the papers are lies. Then that's where we go, tomorrow, before Morrison gets organized." They prepared through the evening, packing supplies, loading ammunition, planning the route. Fort Laramie was 2 days' hard ride to the northeast. They would need food, warm clothes, weapons, and luck. Lots of luck. That night, for the first time, they shared the bed. Not out of desire, though Ethan was acutely aware of her presence beside him, but out of practicality. The cabin had only one bed and they were married now. Pretending otherwise seemed pointless. They lay back to back, both fully dressed, a careful distance between them. But sometime in the night, Ethan woke to find that distance had closed. Ayanna had rolled toward him in sleep, her back pressed against his chest, his arm draped over her waist. He started to pull away, not wanting to presume, but she murmured something in Apache and pulled his arm tighter around her, so he stayed. And eventually, despite everything, despite the danger coming and the uncertainty ahead, he slept. Morning brought Jake Brennan with urgent news. Morrison left town before dawn, Jake said, his breath steaming in the frozen air. Took his men and rode hard for Cheyenne. Word is he's going to the territorial capital to get a judge to invalidate your marriage on grounds of fraud. How long do we have? 3 days, maybe 4 if weather slows him, but Ethan, there's more. Jake's expression was grim. Silas is gathering men, says if the law won't act, citizens will. He's talking about riding out here, burning you out if necessary. I tried to stop him, but he's got people convinced you've betrayed the town. Ethan felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. How many men? 8, maybe 10, armed and angry. They're planning to move tomorrow night. Then we leave today, now. They saddled 2 horses, Ethan's mare Sable and a gelding he had bought the previous year. They packed light but thorough, food for 4 days, ammunition, blankets, weapons, the marriage certificate wrapped in oilcloth and tucked in Ethan's saddlebag. Billy arrived as they were finishing preparations. The boy looked scared and determined in equal measure. Uncle Ethan, I want to come with you. No, Billy, this is going to be dangerous. I don't care, you're family. She's family now, too. Family stands together. Ethan looked at his nephew, this boy who had lost his parents to cholera 2 years back and come to live with Ethan. Old enough to make choices, old enough to understand what standing meant. All right, Ethan said finally, but you follow orders. No arguments. Understood? Yes, sir. They rode out just after noon, 3 riders heading northeast toward Fort Laramie. Behind them, Bitter Ridge receded into the distance, smoke rising from chimneys, people going about their business, unaware or uncaring that one of their own was riding into exile. The first day passed without incident. They made good time, covering nearly 30 miles before making camp in a stand of cottonwoods near a frozen stream. Ethan shot 2 rabbits which Ayanna cleaned and cooked with practiced efficiency. Billy watched her work with open fascination. You really killed a man? He asked suddenly. Billy, Ethan warned. It's all right, Ayanna said quietly. She looked at the boy. Yes, I killed him. He was going to sell me. I chose to live free instead. Was it hard, killing him? Ayanna considered the question seriously. No, that is what frightens me. It should have been hard, should have made me sick or sad, but I felt only relief. Does that make me evil? No, Billy said with the certainty of youth. That makes you strong. That night they slept in shifts, one person always on watch. Ethan took first watch, sitting with his rifle while Ayanna and Billy slept wrapped in blankets near the small fire. The stars were impossibly bright, the Milky Way a river of light across the frozen sky. In the distance, a wolf howled. Another answered. The sound was lonely and beautiful, and reminded Ethan that they were small and vulnerable in a world that cared nothing for their survival. The second day brought the storm. It started as light snow around mid-morning, just a few flakes drifting down from a gray sky. By noon it was a blizzard, wind-driven snow that reduced visibility to nothing, temperature plummeting, the world becoming a white, howling void. They pushed on as long as they could, but eventually Ethan admitted defeat. They could not see 20 feet ahead. The horses were struggling, foundering in drifts that came up past their knees. They needed shelter. Ethan remembered a line shack he had passed once, years ago, when he had been tracking rustlers. It should be close, maybe half a mile north. If he could find it, if it was still standing, if they did not freeze to death first. He led them on foot now, breaking trail, using the wind direction and the slope of the land to navigate when sight was useless. His face went numb. His fingers lost feeling inside his gloves. Behind him, Billy and Ayanna followed with the horses, trusting him to find the way. 20 minutes that felt like hours brought them to a dark shape barely visible through the white. The line shack. Small, half collapsed, but standing. Ethan forced open the door and they crowded inside with the horses, all of them packed into the single room because leaving the animals outside meant watching them die. They got a fire going with the last of Ethan's dry tinder. Fed it carefully with wood torn from the collapsed portion of the shack. The flames grew, pushing back the cold, creating a bubble of warmth in the frozen wilderness. How long will the storm last? Billy asked. His lips were blue, his whole body shaking. Could be hours, could be days. Ethan checked their supplies. They had enough food for 4 days if they were careful. But if the storm lasted longer than that, they would be in trouble. We waited out, no choice. The storm lasted 36 hours. For a day and a half, they were trapped in that tiny shack. The wind howling outside like something alive and angry. Snow piling up against the walls until they had to dig out the door just to keep it from being buried completely. They rationed food carefully, took turns keeping the fire going, slept pressed together for warmth, humans and horses alike. In the enforced intimacy, in the long hours with nothing to do but survive and talk, Ethan learned more about Ayanna, about her childhood in the mountains, about her husband who had died defending their camp, about the skills her father had taught her, the healing knowledge her mother had passed down, about the beauty of the world she had lost. And she learned about him, about Margaret and Thomas, about the war and the things he had done that still woke him some nights, about the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow for 3 years, about the emptiness of a life lived without purpose. You have purpose now, Ayanna said on the second night, lying beside him in the darkness. The fire burned down to coals. You fight for something again. I fight for you. No, not just for me, for what is right, for justice, for the belief that people should be free. That is purpose. That is worth living for. Her hand found his in the darkness, squeezed once. Then she rolled toward him and kissed him. It was not the chaste kiss of their wedding. It was something deeper, hungrier, born of fear and relief and the knowledge that they might not survive this, that death could come in the cold or from Morrison's guns or from a dozen other dangers, that if they were going to live, they needed to live fully now while they still could. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan whispered, "We should stop." Why? Because Billy's right there. Because we're in a frozen shack in the middle of a blizzard. Because this isn't the time or place. And there is never good time or place. There is only now, this moment, this life. She kissed him again, and I choose to live it. What happened next was private and beautiful and necessary. Two people finding warmth in each other, finding life in the midst of death, finding hope when everything was darkness. The storm finally broke on the third morning. They emerged from the shack into a world transformed. The snow had stopped. The sun had come on out. Everything glittered with impossible brightness, painful to look at, but beautiful enough to make the pain worthwhile. But their journey to safety was not yet finished. On the second night after leaving the line shack, they made camp in a narrow canyon with high rock walls on both sides. Ethan chose the spot because it offered shelter from the wind, but he soon realized his mistake. The canyon was a trap if anyone found them, and someone did. Ethan woke to the sound of horses, multiple horses, moving slowly, deliberately. He reached for his rifle and shook Ayanna and Billy awake without making a sound. They moved away from the dying fire, taking cover behind the larger rocks scattered throughout the canyon floor. 5 riders emerged from the darkness. The leader sat tall in his saddle, silhouetted against the stars. Even before he spoke, Ethan knew who it was. Hank Doyle, the man whose brand Ayanna still carried on her wrist. He had come personally, unwilling to let his property escape. "Cole!" Doyle's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "I know you're here. I can see your fire. Give me the woman and you can ride away. This doesn't have to end in blood." Ethan raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. "She's not yours, never was." "I got papers that say different." Doyle's horse took a few steps forward. "Papers older than your fancy marriage certificate. Papers that say I bought her fair and square in 1864. "Papers the Army says are forgeries," Ethan called back. "Army ain't here right now." Doyle gestured and his men began spreading out, moving to surround the camp. "Just you and me and the law. And the law says she's mine." "The law says she's free," Ayanna shouted, standing up from behind her rock. "The law says I am citizen. I am wife. I am human." Doyle laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your property that learned to talk. Nothing more." The first shot came from one of Doyle's men. The bullet sparked off the rock next to Billy's head. Then all hell broke loose. Ethan fired, his Winchester barking in the darkness. One of Doyle's men cried out and fell from his horse. Billy's rifle joined in, the younger man firing with surprising calm. Another rider went down, but they were outnumbered and outflanked. Doyle's men had better position, firing from both sides of the canyon. A bullet tore through Ethan's coat. Another kicked up dirt near Ayanna's feet. Doyle himself was moving forward now, his revolver drawn, his face twisted with rage and greed. He had spent too much money chasing this woman, had lost too much face when she escaped. This ended tonight, one way or another. "If I can't have you," Doyle snarled, aiming his gun at Ayanna's head, "nobody will." His finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot that rang out didn't come from Doyle's revolver. It came from behind him. Doyle jerked forward, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. A red stain bloomed across the back of his coat, spreading like spilled wine. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. He tried to turn to see who had shot him, but his legs gave out. He fell face first into the dirt and did not move again. Behind where Doyle had sat, another rider emerged from the shadows. The moonlight caught his face. Silas Grayson. The saloon owner sat on his horse, a smoking rifle in his hands. His face was hard, unreadable, but his eyes held something Ethan had never seen there before. Not hate, not rage, something almost like peace. Silas? Ethan lowered his rifle, unable to process what he was seeing. Doyle's remaining men, seeing their leader dead, wheeled their horses and fled into the night. The sound of hoofbeats faded, leaving only silence and the smell of gunpowder. Silas rode forward slowly. He stopped 10 feet from where Ethan stood and looked down at Doyle's body with cold satisfaction. Followed you from town, Silas said quietly. Took me 2 days to catch up. He looked at Ayanna. Heard Doyle had put out word he was coming after you himself. Figured you might need help. Why? Ethan asked. You hate her. You hate all Apache. I did. Silas's jaw worked, muscles clenching. My wife, my daughter. They died screaming. Apache arrows. I saw their bodies. He paused, his eyes distant. For 3 years I blamed all of you, every Apache, every Indian. Didn't matter if you'd done it or not. You were all the same to me. He looked at Ethan now. But you stubborn bastard. You stood up in front of the whole town and said she was human. You married her. You chose her over everything. Over your badge. Over your safety. Over being accepted. Silas dismounted, his boots crunching in the dirt. Made me think, made me remember. My wife, she was kind. She wouldn't have wanted me carrying this hate. She'd have been ashamed of what I became. He walked past Ethan and stopped in front of Ayanna. She tensed, her hand moving toward the knife at her belt. But Silas made no threatening move. He just stood there looking at her. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out rough, like they hurt. For what I said, for what I did, for trying to turn the town against you. You didn't kill my family. And even if your people did, you're not them. You're just a woman who wanted to be free. Ayanna stared at him. Then slowly she nodded once. Your hate was heavy. I could feel it. But this, she touched her chest. This is different. This is honest. Yeah, well, Silas turned away, uncomfortable with the emotion. Don't expect me to be nice to you in town. I got a reputation to maintain. But I won't stand by and watch men like Doyle treat people like property. That ain't right. That ain't, he struggled for the word, that ain't civilized. He climbed back on his horse. Fort's another day northeast. I'll ride with you until you're safe inside. After that, you're on your own. Silas? Ethan said. The other man looked back. Thank you. Silas nodded once. Then he rode to the edge of camp and took up a position as guard, his rifle across his saddle, watching the darkness for any sign of Doyle's men returning. Billy came up beside Ethan, his eyes wide. Did that just happen? Yeah, Ethan said quietly. Yeah, it did. Ayanna slipped her hand into Ethan's. Even hearts full of hate can change, she whispered. Even the coldest winter ends. They did not sleep the rest of that night. But as dawn broke over the canyon, painting the rocks gold and red, they rode out together, 4 riders now instead of 3, heading toward Fort Laramie, heading toward freedom. And behind them, Hank Doyle's body lay cooling in the dirt. A man who had thought people could be owned, learning too late that some things can never be possessed. Freedom, dignity, the human spirit. Those no brand or paper or law could ever truly take away. They rode on, following Ethan's memory and the position of the sun, heading northeast toward Fort Laramie. The fort appeared in the distance around midday, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade wall, the American flag snapping in the wind. At the gate, soldiers stopped them, questioned their business. Ethan showed his badge, explained he needed to speak with an Apache scout named Yellowhawk. After some confusion and consultation, they were allowed inside. Yellowhawk was a man in his early 50s, weathered and strong, with eyes that missed nothing. He wore army clothes but moved like an Apache, every gesture economical and sure. When he saw Ayanna, his face transformed. He spoke rapidly in Apache, words tumbling over each other. Ayanna responded in kind, her voice breaking with emotion. They embraced this woman and her cousin, survivors of a world that had tried its hardest to destroy them. Through an interpreter, Yellowhawk explained to Ethan that he had been searching for Ayanna for months, had heard rumors of Apache women being sold by Comancheros, had followed every lead but always been too late. To find her alive, to find her free, was something he had stopped hoping for. I will help her, Shalkuner, Yellowhawk said through the interpreter. I will speak for her, will tell the truth of who she is, when she was taken. The papers that say she was slave in 1864 are lies. I will prove this. That evening, the fort commander, a Colonel Morrison, different Morrison, decent man, agreed to hear their case. In his office, with witnesses present, Yellow Hawk testified in detail about Ayana's life, about her father and mother, about her marriage to Natan, about the attack that killed him in 1876, about seeing Ayana at a trading post in 1877, free and alive, which made it impossible for her to have been anyone's property in 1864. The colonel listened carefully, examined the marriage certificate Ethan presented, examined the wanted poster and the ownership papers Morrison, the bounty hunter, had shown around Bitter Ridge. Finally, he made his decision. "These ownership papers are obvious forgeries," Colonel Morrison said. "The dates are impossible. The signatures don't match known examples from the individuals who supposedly signed them. And we have sworn testimony that places this woman in locations inconsistent with the claims." He looked at Ayana. "Mrs. Cole, you are free. The federal warrant is invalid. I'll send word to the territorial capital immediately." Relief hit Ethan like a physical force. Beside him, Ayana swayed slightly. He caught her arm, steadied her. She looked at him with eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "It is over?" she asked. "It's over," Ethan confirmed. But even as he said it, even as they celebrated with Yellow Hawk and Billy, even as the weight of fear lifted, Ethan knew the deeper truth. It was not over. Not really. They still had to go back to Bitter Ridge, still had to face Silas and his mob, still had to build a life in a town that hated them. The real fight, he understood, was just beginning. They stayed at Fort Laramie for 3 more days, resting, recovering, letting the colonel's paperwork make its way through official channels. Yellow Hawk spent time with Ayana, reconnecting, sharing news of other survivors, rebuilding bonds of family that had been torn by violence and diaspora. On the 4th day, they rode back toward Bitter Ridge. The journey was faster now, no storm to slow them, no pursuers to fear. When the town came into view, smoke rising from chimneys against a blue sky, Ethan felt his stomach tighten. They rode straight to the sheriff's office. Jake was there, looking relieved and worried in equal measure. "Thought you were dead," Jake said, "or run off to California. Silas has been telling everyone you abandoned your post." "I'm back." Ethan handed him the papers from Fort Laramie. Federal exoneration. The ownership papers were forgeries. The warrant was invalid. Ayana is free and clear. Jake read the document slowly, his expression brightening with each paragraph. This is official, signed by a colonel, can't be challenged." "That's the idea. Silas isn't going to like it. Silas can learn to live with it." Word spread quickly. By evening, half the town knew. By morning, everyone knew. Reactions were mixed. Some people, like Ruth, were genuinely happy. Others were neutral, willing to accept the legal decision even if they did not like it. And some, like Silas, were furious. The confrontation came 3 days after their return. Ethan was at the general store buying supplies when Silas entered with 2 of his friends. Large men with mean eyes and fists they were eager to use. "Heard you're back," Silas said. His voice was casual, but his stance was aggressive, spoiling for a fight. "Heard you pulled some strings at the fort. Got your Apache whore declared legal." "She's my wife," Ethan said quietly, "and she's free. Federal court says so. You got a problem with that? Take it up with the Army." "I got a problem with you bringing Indians into our town. Got a problem with you choosing them over us. Got a problem with you pretending to be a lawman when really you're just a traitor." Ethan set down the bag of flour he had been examining, turned to face Silas fully. "Say whatever you want about me, but you disrespect my wife again, and we're going to have a different kind of conversation." Silas stepped closer. "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "It's a promise." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. The whole store seemed to hold its breath. Then Ruth's voice cut through the tension. "Silas Grayson, you start a fight in my store, and I'll ban you for life. You hear me? I don't care how much money you spend. I'll sell to everyone in this territory except you." Silas hesitated. Ruth's store was the only one within 30 miles. Being banned would mean a full day's ride for basic supplies. Not worth it. Not yet. "This isn't finished," Silas said, backing toward the door. "You and your Indian, you aren't welcome here. Eventually you'll figure that out." He left. His friends followed. The store slowly returned to normal. Ruth reached across the counter and squeezed Ethan's hand. "Give it time," she said quietly. "People adapt, even Silas. Hate takes energy. Eventually he'll get tired. And if he doesn't," Ruth smiled sadly, "then you'll deal with it the way you've dealt with everything else, by standing your ground and refusing to break." Spring came slowly to Bitter Ridge, but it came. The snow melted, the creek thawed, grass began to push up through the mud, and with the spring came changes. Ethan and Ayanna rebuilt their cabin, making it larger, adding a second bedroom. Billy helped, coming out every weekend, learning carpentry and laughter in equal measure. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the townspeople began to accept them. Not everyone, but enough. Ayanna started helping Doc Harrison with patients, her knowledge of Apache medicine proving valuable. Some people refused her care. Others, desperate or in pain, accepted help from wherever it came. And when her remedies worked, when her poultices drew out infections and her teas eased down fevers, opinion began to shift. It was not easy. Some days Ethan came home to find Ayanna crying from frustration or hurt, from the slurs thrown at her in the street, from the deliberate snubs and cold shoulders. But she never suggested leaving, never said they should give up. She had fought too hard for her freedom to let small-minded hatred drive her away. On a warm day in late May, 6 months after Ethan had found her in the snow, Ayanna came to him with news that changed everything. "I am with child," she said simply. Ethan felt the words hit him like a physical blow. A child, their child, a life created from survival and stubbornness and love found in the darkest of winters. "You're sure?" "Yes, I know the signs, the sickness in mourning, the changes in my body. By winter, we will be 3. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling the future suddenly become real and precious and terrifying. A child born of 2 worlds, a child who would know prejudice and difficulty, but also, if they did their jobs right, who would know love and safety and freedom. "We'll protect them," Ethan said. "Whatever it takes, we'll make sure they grow up free, that they know both their heritages, that they understand what we fought for." "Yes," Ayanna agreed. "We will teach them to be strong, to stand for what is right, to never accept chains." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky gold and red, they stood together on their porch. Behind them, the cabin they had built. Before them, the town that was slowly, grudgingly learning to accept them. And between them, the future growing one day at a time. It was not the ending Ethan had expected when he found that dying woman in the snow. It was better, harder and messier and more complicated, but better. Because it was real, because they had fought for it, because they had chosen each other not out of desperation, but out of the deep human need for connection and meaning and love. The last winter had been brutal, but it had led to spring, and spring, despite everything, had led to life. And that, Ethan thought, as he held his wife and thought about the child to come, that was enough. That was everything. 5 years passed like seasons, each one bringing its own challenges and small victories. Thomas Nathan Cole was born in December of 1879, during the first snowfall of winter. He came into the world screaming, his lungs strong, his grip fierce when he wrapped his tiny fingers around Ethan's thumb. Ayanna had labored for 18 hours with Ruth and Doc Harrison attending. When it was over, when the baby was cleaned and wrapped and placed in her arms, she looked up at Ethan with exhaustion and joy mingled in her dark eyes. "Our son," she whispered, "born free." Ethan had held the boy and felt something shift inside him. A weight he had carried since Margaret and Thomas, his first son, had died, finally began to lift. This was not replacement. This was renewal. A second chance at fatherhood he had never expected to receive. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Ruth and Jake, brought gifts. Others whispered behind closed doors about half-breed children and the pollution of good Christian stock. But Ethan and Ayanna had grown thick-skinned by then. They focused on their son, on teaching him to be strong and kind in equal measure. By 1884, Thomas was 5 years old. He ran through the cabin like a small whirlwind, chasing chickens, climbing trees, speaking both English and Apache with equal fluency. He had Ethan's gray eyes and Ayanna's bronze skin and black hair. He belonged to both worlds and neither. And he was loved fiercely by both parents. Ayanna was pregnant again, 7 months along with their daughter. They had already chosen her name, Margaret Najoni Cole, for Ethan's first wife and for the Apache word meaning beautiful, a bridge between their pasts and their future. The cabin had grown with their family. Ethan had added a second bedroom, expanded the kitchen, built a barn for their growing livestock. They had 2 cows now, 4 horses, chickens, and a small herd of goats Ayana used for milk and cheese. The garden she tended produced enough vegetables to see them through winter with surplus to trade in town. Billy, now 21, visited every week. He had become deputy sheriff under Jake, who had taken over when Ethan finally retired the badge to focus on farming and family. Billy adored Thomas, teaching him to ride, to shoot, to track. The boy worshipped his older cousin in return. Even Silas Grayson had softened, though he would never admit it. One day when Thomas had gotten lost in the woods during a storm, Silas had been part of the search party. When they found the boy cold but alive, sheltering under a fallen tree, Silas had carried him back to town on his horse without a word. The next day, a hand-carved wooden horse appeared on the cabin porch. No note, but Ethan knew Silas's carving style. Acceptance came slowly, grudgingly, but it came. On a warm evening in late summer, with the sun painting the mountains gold and the air full of the scent of pine and wildflowers, Ethan sat on his porch watching his son play. Thomas was teaching himself to lasso a fence post, his small hands struggling with the rope, his determination absolute. Ayana came out and sat beside him, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Inside, their daughter kicked and turned, impatient to be born. "What are you thinking?" Ayana asked. Ethan took her hand. "I'm thinking about that day in the snow when I found you, when I thought you were already dead. I was dying, but you didn't die, you lived. And you gave me a reason to live too." Thomas successfully lassoed the post and let out a whoop of triumph. He turned to them, his face bright with pride. Did you see, Papa?" "I saw," Ethan called back. "Well done, son." Ayana leaned her head against his shoulder. "What will you tell them, when they are old enough to understand, about how we met?" "The truth," Ethan said, "that the world tried to destroy you and failed, that you fought for your freedom and won, that love can cross any divide if people are brave enough to reach for it, and that their father is good man. Strange, but good." Ethan smiled. "I'll take that." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set. Thomas abandoned his rope and came running up the porch steps, throwing himself into Ethan's lap. The boy smelled of grass and sunshine and childhood. "Tell me a story," Thomas demanded. "Tell me about the old days." "Which old days?" "When you were a warrior and Mama was Apache, before I was born." Ethan looked at Ayana. She nodded. So he began. "Once, in the coldest winter anyone could remember, a sheriff rode out into the snow." Thomas listened with rapt attention, his eyes wide. He had heard versions of this story before, but never tired of it. The tale of how his parents met, how they fought against hatred and law and men who thought some people could be owned, how they won. When the story ended, when Thomas had been sent inside to wash up for dinner, Ethan and Ayana remained on the porch. The first stars were appearing, bright pinpoints in the darkening sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayana asked quietly. "Choosing me over everything else?" Ethan turned to look at her, this woman who had been a dying stranger in the snow, who had become his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, who had taught him that life was worth living, that love was worth fighting for, that freedom was worth any cost. "Never," he said, "not for a single moment." Inside, they could hear Thomas laughing at something Billy was saying. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like distant music. The world continued its turning, indifferent to their small human drama. But here, in this place they had built from nothing but stubborn refusal to surrender, they had carved out something precious. A home, a family, a future. Years later, long after both Ethan and Ayana had passed into memory, their children and grandchildren would tell the story. Of a sheriff who found a dying Apache woman in the snow. Of a winter that tested them both. Of love that refused to bow to hate. The cabin still stood in the pine forest north of what had been Bitter Ridge. It had been expanded over the generations, but the original logs remained, weathered but strong, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other over fear. And on cold December nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains, locals swore they could still hear echoes. Not of violence or sorrow, but of laughter, of children playing, of two people who had survived the worst the world could offer and built something beautiful in spite of it. The last winter of Ethan Cole had been the coldest, but it had led to the warmest spring, and that spring had bloomed into a summer that lasted generations. Some stories end, this one simply continued, carried forward by every child who learned that love was stronger than hate, that freedom was worth fighting for, that one person's choice to see another as human could change everything. In the end, that was the legacy Ethan and Ayanna left behind. Not wealth, not fame, just the simple, revolutionary truth that all people deserve to be free. And that sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to love when the world demands hate. The story ends where it began, in the snow, in the cold. But this time there is warmth. This time there is hope. This time no one is dying alone.